Hello. We're going to talk today about the uh, project called Deep Transitions Futures, and specifically how we have developed a methodology for looking at future scenarios. And to address this, if we could have the next slide. We're going to have a brief introduction to deep transitions, which will somewhat duplicate what some of you will have heard this morning or earlier today with Jan Schott's presentation. And then we will talk specifically about our futures methodology. Carla will address that. And then we'll talk about the development of that methodology using crowdsourcing. Jenny will address that. And then we'll have a demonstration of the crowdsourcing technique that we're using. Okay, with that, I'll begin then to talk about the Deep Transitions Futures project. And we have a rationale for the project, which is that, well, we have many metaphors. The world is on fire. We're on a freight train headed towards the cliff, and so forth. All of these are an indication of the challenge that we face with regard to climate change, social inequality, species depletion, and to address all of these, tremendous levels of investment will be needed in order to transform our current systems that are not fit for purpose. Simply investing more in the systems that we have will not deliver a sustainable and socially just future. So the idea of the Deep Transitions Future Project is to bring together academics from the sustainability transitions field with a panel of private and public investors to take on this challenge of how to make the investment in transformative change. Could you have the next slide? So what is Deep Transitions as a project? Primarily, we began, I don't know how long ago now, but 6 years ago, studying Deep Transitions history. No, we don't need the next slide. We need to stay on the same slide. Go back. Yes. And the transition between that history and the future is confrontation of present day challenges. And our focus is on a number of socio-technical systems, food, mobility, and energy. And you'll hear more about those. And our objective is to imagine how those socio-technical systems may be changed by transformative innovation in the future. What are the pathways to a more sustainable and socially just future? Next slide, please. When we talk about socio-technical system change, we're talking about making a fundamental change, a radical change in the system. And this is different than system optimization. Many of the things that are purported to be progressive with regard to environmental and other challenges, other social challenges, are actually, when more closely examined, simply optimizing the system that we have. And in some cases, for example, electrical vehicle, we may be partially redesigning the system without taking a full system change. So we change the system to electrical vehicles, but we maintain the system of private ownership of cars. That's discarding many of the important elements of system change that are possible if we begin to think of mobility rather than private car ownership as the social need that we need to serve. Next slide. So when we analyze transition process, and socio-technical systems. We have the notion that the socio-technical system has a number of dimensions that are represented here in the Pentagon by particular elements: culture, materials and markets and consumption, science and technology, infrastructure, policy, and industry. And these interact and very importantly are shaped by the rules embedded in beliefs, practices, the way things are done. Okay, it's one of the important unit of analysis in transitions thinking is to think about how the current systems are perpetuated by a set of rules that continue to operate and can only be disrupted by fundamental change in rules. And so to make those changes, we need niche actors that are pursuing different rules to either replace current regime actors or to challenge them sufficiently that they change. Next slide, please. So how would we then define deep transition? So we could think there was a very ancient deep transition when we settled down to agrarian pursuits rather than living by hunting and gathering mode. But the most important deep transition that we've experienced in recent history, well, relatively recent history, is the Industrial Revolution. And indeed, most of what happened in the Industrial Revolution is shaping the world as we see it today. The most important element from my perspective of the Industrial Revolution was the tapping of fossil fuel energy. That was what allowed us to do most of what we today regard as the modern world. Before that, we had to rely upon human and animal power with a limited amount of wind, the old style windmills to grind grain, and the old style watermills similarly to grind grain and do some other things. But most energy was either draft animals or draft humans. And so what is involved in a deep transition is rethinking those systems in ways that don't rely on the fossil fuels and therefore the carbon emissions of those, to rethink how our entire systems operate. But that's not the only change that needs to be made. There are many other features that need to come together. So what we think about in terms of a definition of deep transition is that it's a fundamental transformation of socio-technical systems in a similar direction that takes account of surges of development, for example, digitization in the current period, and leads to new socio-technical landscapes, the landscapes of the future. Next slide, please. So I mentioned rules earlier, and rules are what govern individual socio-technical system. And this term meta rules refers to ones that span multiple socio-technical systems. So some of the meta rules of the first deep transition are mass production, individual mass consumption, linear production, by which we mean produce, consume, discard. That's the linearity. Carbonized production, that's the use of fossil fuels, and building global value chains, which of course contributes through the international transport using carbonized transport mechanisms. Next slide, please. What might be the meta rules of the second deep transitions? These are provisional. One can have different opinions about these, but some of them seem necessary. For example, we need to move away from linear production to something like a circular economy. We need to rethink private ownership of, for example, vehicles, because vehicles sit idle most of the time and occupy an enormous amount of urban land in parking lots and garages. We need to rethink how we produce things so that it is either low or no carbon, and how we consume things in the same light. And we need to think about the division between local and global with an environmental perspective and also a social perspective of what that implies. Next slide. So in the Deep Transition Futures Project, we used the theory that I've just described very briefly to create 3 future worlds. And we did this with the panel of investors that we'll show in just a moment. These futures represent 3 alternative worlds in which we have solved the current grand challenges. And they involve different technologies, values, and forms of organizing society. Next slide, please. This is the global investors panel that participated with us in the exercise. And you'll hear more about these 3 worlds and how we devised them from the following speakers. I believe that concludes. The next slide is a contact and thank you sort of slide.
I think it continues with my presentation. So thank you as well.
Okay.
I'll continue with explaining the scenario methodology. So I hope you can see my screen. So as I mentioned, this has been, the futures bid has been almost a year of work. Yeah, starting from April last year. Okay, and until the present, and it's a project that will continue until June this year. And what I'm going to talk about now is the center part, the building of futures. So a bit on what was the methodology that we use. So our scenario approach is very unique. We develop a specific methodology that use some of the elements of the transition theory that Ed mentioned to envision 3 desirable futures. This was a process of co-creation together with the Global Investors panel. And as I said, these are futures that are desirable. So we did not just do explorative scenarios of how the future might look like, but rather we crafted 3 scenarios that are desirable. They solve global challenges in very different ways. And we have, in this process, used the key deep transitions elements, so the rules, niches, and the regime vulnerability, so those are shocks and trends. And we use a different mix of this new rules and how these niches can unlock them. And as you see in the figure on the right, the idea of this understanding of deep transitions is that there's always been, and this historical understanding of developing futures is that there's always been alternative pathways, and this might lead us to alternative futures. So we're a bit building on the possibilities of what could have been or what would be in building these 3 desirable scenarios. So to give you a bit of an idea of what we did, if you can see, hoping that slide already load, because I know my internet seems to be a bit slow. But you see on the left side, there's a map of a system. In this case, is the mobility system. You might not see the details, but it just to give you an idea of what the complexity is of what we were talking about. And so we started from the socio-technical understanding of the system with different elements that are connected together. And then you'll see like little tags on a lilac, and that's the rules, which were the key element that drove our process of building a scenario. So what are the rules that are characteristic of our system, and how can this change? For instance, you can read there mass-produced cars and customized accessories. In addition, we had we consider different megatrends and shocks that would lead to changes in these rules, like geopolitical conflict or war, or the pandemic, or megatrends such as globalization or growing inequality. So, for example, in following the idea of the mobility regime, we selected and we identified together with the panel a list of vulnerable and resilient rules. So vulnerable rules are those rules that are more prone to change given these megatrends and shocks. So for this, were the ones that selected by the panel. And so we thought, what would be the alternative of this rule if it changed? So the vulnerable rule in this case would be car is a product to be privately owned, and then the alternative would be mobility as a service, where car ownership is not a thing. People don't own cars anymore, but rather it becomes a service that is shared. So we did that many times for 3 systems, for the system of food, mobility, and energy, and we developed 9 visions in which social challenges are solved. So 9 desirable futures, 3 for each system, with different alternative rules, and each of them with different niches. So that's different new social innovation, business model technologies that will unlock this alternative pathways. So to give you an example, this is another graph that again talks about mobility. So this is just a glimpse, but on the top you see the pentagon, which refers to the regime changing. So it in this case it shows how electric cars that are shared become dominant and replace existing oil-based cars. And you see at the bottom different colors of circles, which are the niches that that will support and will develop through this process of transformation. So we did this for every future in order to understand what was the sort of a little bit ambition, what would be a possible pathway for development of this specific future. Thinking as well, as you see in the waves, of different mega trends and shocks that could mobilize some of these niches and lead to the desired transformations. So after doing that, for each of these 9 futures, we sort of started to we wanted to craft a more coherent future, like a full story of how the world looks like, not just one socio-technical system. So we group the different features in the different socio-technical futures into groups of 3, and we develop like the scenarios that we're working with, and you'll learn about those after. So one of them is called After the Frugal Turn, which focuses on rejecting consumption and living more in a localized sort of self-sufficient communities, do no harm, living in harmony with the planet, and common sets of technologies and social arrangement. And then Airshot, which is about high-tech development. And so to finish this now scenarios, futures worlds that have a more coherent and narrative about how the world look like. We look at how in each of these socio-technical systems we could identify niches that would trigger this transformation. So we look at the niches that were overlapping between different systems, and as well as the niches that will be driven by two trends or meta rules, that we call them, sustainability and digitalization. So for instance, again, this case is not too clear. For instance, we have production of biofuels as an intersection between energy and food as a way to to unlock a specific future. So to this point, what we have is a narrative of a future, of a pathway in which it became, it could become reality, and then a set of niches that together with the panel have been identified. And what we want to do now, and the purpose of the session today, is to that we want to open this discussion to a broader public, so not just the panel and ourselves, but ask others what do they think about the specific ideas. And so with that, I give the floor to Jenny.
The three future worlds that we developed and the ideas that we developed as a part of Deep Transitions Futures into a crowdsourcing initiative to basically present our ideas in a very accessible way to an outside audience and sort of test our ideas and our worlds with a wider public. And before I go into a little bit more detail of what our crowdsourcer looks like, I'll start out with giving a short introduction what a crowdsourcer is in the first place. So basically, the definition of crowdsourcing can be said to incorporate the terms crowd, outsourcing, and social web, meaning that crowdsourcing initiatives usually involve large and diverse groups of people, outsourcing a specific task or problem, and using online platforms that often share some characteristics of social media platforms. Basically, a crowdsourcing initiative can be said to be a collective intelligence tool and a way to harness the knowledge and ideas of a large online community. Next slide, please. So why are we using a crowdsourcer for Deep Transitions Futures, and what are we trying to achieve with it? So the methodology that Ed and Carla have described and that we applied for developing the three future worlds, we basically try to be as inclusive as possible, applying an interdisciplinary approach and really taking a global perspective and various contexts into consideration throughout the development process. But of course, we can't deny that a bit of a bias remains, as we're a rather small group of people. Not all regions of the world are represented in our team, and we're also not very diverse in terms of backgrounds, living standards, etc. So basically, with the crowdsourcer, we strive to address our own biases and really uncover the shortcomings and the gaps of our methodology, and use this campaign to test the feasibility and the desirability of the three worlds that we developed. And basically, within Deep Transitions Futures, we use the crowdsourcer as a public outreach activity to, again, present our work to the outside world in a very accessible way, and to test, validate, and critically scrutinize our own ideas. So in summary, it can be said that our aim is to reach an audience that is as diverse as possible regarding regions of origin, occupation, age group, etc. Next slide, please. And how are we trying to do that? So the crowdsourcer campaign of Deep Transitions Futures is basically tied to one key question, namely, which future world can you see yourself living in? And the idea behind this key question is that we ask people to take a look at the 3 worlds that we develop and really think for themselves which of those 3 worlds, taking their own living conditions and region into consideration, they could see themselves live in, what kind of actions would be needed in order to achieve this world, what kind of innovations would be needed, but also maybe where are the gaps regarding the worlds that we have developed. And currently, we're in the process of disseminating the crowdsourcing campaign to the relevant audience groups, which includes civil society, governments such as municipalities, politicians, and government agencies, academia and education. So that would include research networks and funders, businesses, especially of the food, transport, and energy industry, and the media, such as journalists, general media outlets, and regional media outlets as well. And how are we disseminating the crowdsourcing campaign? Basically by means of direct email invitations, social media, various online newsletters and events like this one. And in general, if you're aware of any relevant contacts or organizations from your region that we should share this with, then please drop us a message in the chat or contact us directly if you'd like to learn more about this. You can see the URL to our website as well as our social media accounts on the slide there. And one thing that I'd quickly like to show you as well is the dedicated landing page that we've developed on the Deep Transitions website for this campaign, which is providing a bit more information about the rationale and also includes multiple languages of the campaign page as well. Carla, if you go back to the previous slide, that should have the URL there. Yes. Is it possible for you to click it so we can take a quick look? Okay, if not, then that's also okay. But in any case, if you would like to, there we go. Sorry, sharing screen is a little bit glitchy in this session somehow, so please bear with us just a second longer. Okay, somehow not the entire screen is showing up. Carla, maybe it helps if you stop sharing the slides. Okay, there we go. Perfect. So indeed, this is the dedicated campaign page, which is part of the Deep Transitions project website. And as you can see here, we started out by just providing a little bit of background information about the campaign itself and the aims. And then we're basically moving on to introducing the 3 future worlds in a very accessible kind of way. And basically our aim with this was to really sort of take people on a bit of a journey through each of the future worlds. So to really give them the chance to imagine what a future on each of those worlds could look like. And we also developed an animation for that purpose, which we will show you in a second. And there's also, per future world, there's one dedicated narrative that, again, provides a bit of an, shall be an inspiration for the reader to really imagine what sort of daily life in that future world would look like, would feel like, what people would do on a daily basis, what their hobbies would look like, what they would eat, etc. So please do check it out in case you're curious. And we're going to take a look at the animation now to give you a bit of an idea of the future worlds that we've described.
For many alive today, the future feels more uncertain than ever before. Interconnected global challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and increasing social inequalities make us question whether our and our children's lives will be safe, secure, and happy. At times, it feels like these challenges are too big and too complex for us to overcome. But at Deep Transitions, we believe we have the opportunity to radically reshape the future through the decisions and actions that we take today. To explore how different the future could be, we developed 3 distinct visions of our world in the year 2050. In each of these visions, humanity tackles our global challenges in different ways according to alternative values, technologies, and ways of organizing society. The world of 2050 will be the result of all of our collective experiences, desires, values, and perspectives. We want you to be part of creating a new, better future. We invite you to listen, to think, reflect, and reply to these future visions, and to imagine together these sustainable worlds that we can inhabit. Imagine a future in which limitless consumption is rejected in favor of living within the Earth's means, a world in which humanity reduces its global footprint and brings balance to distribution, allowing all Earth citizens an equal share of our global commons. We call this world After the Frugal Turn. In this world, our priorities shifted to creating an equitable and just energy system that works for all within planetary boundaries. Our sense about what brings quality of life has changed. We value a slower, low energy, and more aware way of living, learning from old traditions while also driving innovations in low energy technology and services. Quicker than expected, these innovations materialized a just energy system, providing sustainable energy access to even the most remote places on Earth. Our mobility system has seen a similarly radical shift as societies began promoting the localization of services and industries, such as the food within a 300-kilometer principle and a 30-minute city. The accelerating digitization of human interaction removed the need for long-distance travel, and when people do travel, they often choose to embrace the value of slow. In the food system, the need to reduce human agriculture's impact on the natural world in line with ecological ceilings sparked a global race to optimize local, national, and global systems, ensuring that all have access to sufficient food. Eliminating food waste and reducing consumption of high-impact foods such as beef were the first steps in creating a new food system, balanced with nature and distributed more equally among humanity than ever before. Imagine instead a second world, one in which dramatic biodiversity loss and ecosystem destruction forced us to rediscover our dependence on and appreciation for the natural world. Abandoning our disregard for the living world around us, we resolved to transform our systems to work with and through nature, understanding that we are only one part of a spectacular, indivisible web of life. We call this world Do No Harm. Led by entrepreneurs and creators in the spirit of energy independence and sustainability, communities have come together throughout the world and triggered a renewable energy revolution. First hamlets, then villages, towns, and eventually whole cities have taken action, setting up autonomous and interconnected renewable energy systems, producing a global and yet decentralized energy society. Leading up to 2050, communities around the world drove radical changes in transport. The Mobility as a Right movement emphasized low-cost, fast and efficient public transit as an alternative to the car-dominated approach of the 20th and early 21st century. Massive investment into public transport infrastructure has resulted in hyperloop transit networks that connect to even the most remote areas. The emergence of the nature share movement has ushered in profound changes to an extractive and polluting food system, transforming it, via regenerative agriculture, into a means to regenerate the natural world. Farmers are no longer seen just as food producers, but instead as ecological stewards, managing ecosystem health above all else. And finally, imagine a world that today would sound like a technological utopia, but that has become a reality only 30 years from now. Inspired by the spirit of the 20th century moon missions, we resolved to finally deliver on the promise of solving the grand challenges of the 21st century with grand solutions of human ingenuity and entrepreneurial spirit. Guided by eco-modernism and circular economies, the adoption of development-oriented missions across all levels of governance, from local to global, fueled a new boom in truly radical and disruptive innovation. We call this world Earthshot. The deployment of large solar energy farms in deserts across the world was the initial cornerstone of this new globally designed energy infrastructure, which has further balanced power dynamics through nations' interdependence. For this future, ending our reliance on fossil fuels was painful at first, particularly for the car-dominated mobility system. But as energy megaprojects came online and energy abundance was reached, an entirely new mobility infrastructure based on autonomous, connected, electric, and shared vehicles became possible. In the Earthshot food system, growing networks of DIY biohacking communities have brought together geneticists, farmers, university students, and enthusiasts to produce thousands of new food crops and products that suit any and all conditions across the globe. And to share the benefits of this innovation, digital genome libraries that are free and available to all allow food solution products to rapidly proliferate all across the world. Which of these worlds can you see yourself living in? Share your thoughts through our crowdsourcing initiative and contribute to shaping the future.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll hope that that was inspiring enough to make you want to use the crowdsourcer. But now we're going to actually use the crowdsourcer live. And for that, I have a volunteer, Andrea, here today with us, who's going to do these crowdsources for the first time. So if you go to the crowdsourcer page, you can click here. Andrea, you're there?
Yes.
Okay. On my slow internet, somehow you seem to be frozen, but I think you're there. So you click on Start Crowdsourcer, and it's going to take you to a page where you start the crowdsourcer. So we have a little introduction about the context of the project. And as it says, it should not take you more than 5 to 10 minutes. So you click here on Get Started. So the first question, Andrea, after watching this wonderful video, is which of the three three futures do you think is more suitable to address the societal challenges like climate change and growing inequality?
Well, first I have to say that before I had my mindset already, and then I watched the video, and I feel like they all look very interesting. But anyway, for the purpose of the exercise, I would say the second one after the frugal turn.
Okay, great. So then we click next. So the first question is, which new or existing innovations are needed to create this future? So we're first asking you what is needed to realize this world, and asking the participants of the crowdsourcer to input which innovations they think would be needed. So if you click here, you can see there's a number of innovations already included, but you can also write your own ideas. So Andrea, can you tell me which innovations do you think are needed to achieve this world?
maybe changing the principles that we guide ourselves on. So thinking about sufficiency as a principle for guiding our actions.
So it's a new idea. So I press enter. Is this gonna new innovation affect any of these three areas in particular: food, energy, transport, or other, or all of them?
I'd say all of them, if it's possible.
Yeah, for sure. So we click add and we'll have it in the list. Is there any other innovation you think it's needed?
Maybe thinking about the energy system, we can think about carbon footprint taxes.
Carbon taxes. I thought we had that one already. So good one. And click enter, and then I assume this one is more for, well, which area would be most affected?
Energy, I guess.
And then we'll click add. So you have one more. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Buying local would be another one.
So you can see, for instance, already it suggests me things that are similar. So local provision is maybe similar, but I think in this case, you want to choose local provision or you want to add buying local?
Let's add it. I think it might be more like a wider element to it.
Right. And then which area would be most affected?
Food and other.
Great. So we added the three innovations, and then you go next. So then the next question is, which combinations of these innovations will amplify the transition? So you have a list of things that have been input either by you or by other people that have already participated of this crowdsourcer. And so what the question is asked, the crowdsourcer is asking you now is, which two innovations you think are the biggest one, the ones that will really trigger the change that is required to unlock the world that you have chosen?
I would go with the sufficiency one, and I think the equal.
You have to unlock and select, and then, sorry?
And equal working opportunities sounds interesting for my context.
There you go. So you can also say, show me others, and then you will have others that were in the list. So you click next, and then the next question is, what innovation will result if you combine these two principles, sufficiency as a principle and equal working opportunities?
Can it be something like a social innovation? So, for instance, we would have like better, greater focus on well-being, inclusion, and equality.
All right. So we can greater. Oh, we have only 37 characters, so I will write inclusion and equality.
Yeah.
There you go. So I press enter, and you can add an explanation of why you think this is the result of this two innovations. So then we click next. And then the next question is, where should we start? So in contrast to the previous one of like which ones are the ones that would have the biggest effect, this question is about if you were to choose two innovations from your own context, where you're living or working now, and your community, what would those two innovations be if you would have to prioritize?
I would say the global circular economy, and
We can see others as well.
Regenerative agriculture sounds interesting.
Great. Oh, somehow this is in Spanish now. Good to know. Normally this would be in English, but I think I made a change that I should have not made. So this is also to tell you that the survey is also in Spanish and it's going to be launched today, but this should be in English. Anyways, the final question is to tell us more about how you think these two innovations that you have selected, global circular economy and regenerative agriculture, will change your community or are needed in your community.
It would probably bring a lot of attention to waste reduction and acknowledging the value of agriculture stakeholders in my country. So people involved in agriculture, I mean.
Great. So that's it. And then finally, we ask you to fill in some personal details, which we will not ask Andrea for privacy reasons. Things like that. I just wanted to finally note that if you were going to be doing a raffle to get a poster of the different illustrations, so if you want to participate, you can put your email there. So that's it. And I'll stop sharing my screen. And now we have time, and if you can put back Ed and Jenny on the screen, we have time for some questions or reactions from the audience. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. So I guess there's no questions for the moment. Thank you, Teresa. Well, hopefully we'll hear. Oh, there's the comment from Klaus. In critical socio-ecological transformations, we live imperial lifestyles and they are still in trend. As a system modeler, under such assumptions, I can achieve around 60% of carbon reduction. Long-distance air travel jet engines are only with, unfortunately, very high cost in testing fuels to decarbonize. So the scenario stays a costly experience, but far from a solution with 8 billion people in hope to catch up on common imperial lifestyles. Ed, do you want to respond to that comment? Is Ed frozen on my screen?
I think he's just muted.
Oh.
Ed, are you able to unmute?
It seems there's a problem on that side. There's a question from Teresa. How do you intend to diffuse to a bigger audience? Jenny, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, sure. So basically what we've done now is we've spent quite some time on doing an initial research phase on relevant contacts from basically all regions of the world. As I mentioned in my presentation, we predefined 5 key audience groups. which includes civil society, government, academia, etc. And then we basically broke those key audiences down into somewhat more specific sub-audiences. And then, we have an initial database now with a relevant context that we're inviting to contribute to the crowdsourcer, in addition to all the channels that are already available to us and the organizations of the team. So that also includes the members of the Global Investors Panel and their organizations. So we're basically starting with that, and then we are hoping for a bit of a snowballing system at some point, so that as we continue to sort of draw attention to the campaign, that then the awareness for it is going to grow. And of course also things like this event now and this session is also one of the outreach activities that we're undergoing to basically increase awareness for the campaign. So again, if any of you are aware of contacts or organizations that we should share this with, then please do let us know. And of course, feel invited to contribute yourselves. That would also be great.
Thank you, Jenny.
I may have succeeded in becoming unmuted now. So let me come back to Klaus's question. So implicit in Klaus's question is the idea that we are going to follow patterns of consumption that we experience today in the rich countries, calling them the imperial countries, and that is in fact questioned in one of the worlds, the frugal turn world, presumes a much more egalitarian outcome, and indeed presumes that people don't travel by jet airplanes. There are alternatives. One can travel by boat, and one can decarbonize ships more easily than one can decarbonize aircraft. But by 2050, varieties of technologies for decarbonizing air travel will exist. But beyond that, there's the question of how we construct our world in terms of current patterns of consumption. And I say, in some respects, the aim is to create patterns of consumption that are more sustainable in all three worlds. And I would say that one thing that unites all three worlds is a interest in greater local self-sufficiency and self-production, because that's the way that we get to a more inclusive world as well.
Thank you, Ed. And there's 5 minutes left, so I'll quickly answer the two questions by Paulina and Carmen, because I think they're connected. So are the three future scenarios exclusive? No. I think indeed they're kind of, in a way, a bit of archetypes of how the future could develop into desirable futures, but you could see a future where you have different elements of different scenarios, the three future worlds, or you could see that one future world is more desirable for certain location and not for others. So you could have in the same planet various of these future worlds coexisting. Having said that, in response to Carmen's question, the way the crowdsourcer is built, it asks you to select a future first and then ask you to backcast from that a future. So unfortunately, it's not possible to indicate that the solution will fit in more than one scenario in the way that the tool is built. You can answer the survey the crowdsourcing more than once if you want to highlight the importance of innovation for more than one scenario, but the way it's built, it allows you to only select one world. And to Biravat's comments, yes, I'll contact you via the app, so maybe we can discuss how to share the materials. I think we're almost, we only have 5 minutes left, so if there's any other question on the chat. Well, so if there's no other questions, I want to close thanking everyone for participating of the session, inviting you to use the crowdsourcing, especially Andrea, who volunteered to do the crowdsourcer for the first time, and Jenny, who's in a very awkward time zone, but still join us, and Ed, as always. So yeah, thank you, everyone, and please, if you have any questions, we're in the demonstration space of the conference. Leave your questions there, and we'll be happy to answer.